Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. So it's been a great couple of days for women's sports. Yesterday was the Girls in Women in Sports Day, and to mark the occasion, Trump signed his executive order protecting women's sports and essentially banning transgender athletes from competing in the women's category, at least if any school or publicly funded institution wants to continue to receive their federal funding. Part of the executive order was also to make it easier for female athletes to pursue lawsuits against these institutions that have subjected them to these injustices. And just Tuesday, the day before the executive order was signed, a new lawsuit was filed by former students of the University of Pennsylvania who were on a team with Lia Thomas and who unfortunately were also stuck in the locker room with Lia Thomas. Part of the lawsuit involved them sharing the trauma that they suffered as a result of being put in that position in the first place. Now, Trump's Department of Education is actually looking into these cases, looking into these stories that involve transgender athletes, where the schools have endorsed it, the schools have enabled it, schools such as SJSU and UPenn. So the lawsuit filed on Tuesday was from 4 former University of Pennsylvania women's swimmers who alleged they suffered emotional trauma by having transgender swimmer Lia Thomas as a teammate, and they have called for the school, the Ivy League school, to expunge Lia Thomas's records. As you can imagine, a record held by a male athlete is unlikely to be beaten anytime soon. It's unlikely to be reclaimed by a female athlete anytime soon. Now, this shouldn't even require a court case, but unfortunately it does. UPenn alum Grace Easterbrook, Margot Kakzarowski, and Ellen Holmquist filed the suit on Tuesday. The 3 graduates alleged their former school, Harvard University, the NCAA and Ivy League Council of Presidents, harassed, abused, and violated federal laws when they allowed Thomas to compete on their team, according to the lawsuit obtained by Fox News. So the lawsuit alleges the UPenn administrators told the women that if anyone was struggling with accepting Thomas's participation on the UPenn women's team, they should seek counselling and support from CAPS and the LGBTQ Centre. So we've all heard this story, how the women were told to seek counselling, how they were essentially told that there was something wrong with them and that they need to seek help. I had no idea that they were actually directed towards these LGBTQ organisations to seek counselling. How does that work exactly? So in other words, the school encouraged them to seek re-education, which is a complete dismissal of their concerns, their fears, their feelings, all to appease a male athlete in the wrong division. Absolutely sickening. Kakzarowski and Holmquist, who graduated in 2024, and Easterbrook, a 2022 graduate, claimed they were repeatedly emotionally traumatized because Thomas was allowed to compete with them, a violation of Title IX. And apparently Trump's Department of Education is looking into this, is looking into these schools who violated Title IX, forcing women to compete against male athletes and to be in the locker room with them. Schools that have been accused of discriminating against female athletes on the basis of sex. They claim the school officials pushed their pro-trans ideology on the women throughout the time Thomas was on the team. Administrators allegedly invited the swimmers to a talk titled Trans 101. You can't make this stuff up. Where they believed if they had a problem with a trans-identifying male on their team, they had psychological problems and needed to seek a counsellor. I mean, if this isn't the ultimate form of gaslighting, if this isn't messing with the heads of these female athletes, I don't know what is. And pointed them towards propagandists, trans activists who obviously have a vested interest in indoctrinating these women. They also claim that they were warned against speaking out. The school essentially tried to silence them. And this is a story that has been told by multiple female athletes over the years. You can't speak out, you can't object. Your First Amendment rights don't matter because you are a female athlete. That's the message these schools had for these girls, that your voice doesn't matter, your concerns don't matter, because you're a woman, or the wants and desires of the male athlete is more important. So Trump's Department of Education has launched an investigation. The investigation is into potential Title IX violations that occurred at multiple education institutions, hours after he signed an executive order to ban trans athletes from women's sports. Remember Melissa Beatty-Smoos? She filed a Title IX complaint against SJSU and she was fired. So I really hope Trump is looking into this because there are so many women who have been affected by this. The Department's Office of Civil Rights, OCR, will be investigating San Jose State University and the University of Pennsylvania and the Massachusetts Interscholastic Athletics Association for separate incidents involving trans athletes competing on a women's or girls' sports team. Pursuant of President Trump's Keeping Men Out of Women's Sports executive order yesterday, the US Department of Education today announced investigations into 2 educational institutions and an athletic association where violations of Title IX have been reported. This is absolutely wonderful news. Finally, these women are being heard. Finally, the injustices against them are being taken seriously. We're going to see some accountability after all of this. Long overdue accountability. President Trump's executive order keeping men out of women's sports is a promise to women and girls. This administration will not tolerate the mistreatment of female athletes. And of course, there are multiple lawsuits involving the NCAA, for example. At UPenn, transgender swimmer Lia Thomas was allowed to compete on the women's swim team because the NCAA allowed it, due to their policy that has been there since 2010. And the schools that subjected their female athletes to this, what did they do? They cited the NCAA policies. Till this day, they say they were just following the policy, they were not breaking any rules. They reinforced the idea that Lia Thomas wasn't breaking any rules because Lia Thomas was in line with the NCAA policies, taking testosterone suppressants and all of that sort of thing a year before competing. So that's what they stood by. They stood by that policy and hid behind it as if what they were doing was justified. When all it takes is applying right from wrong. When all it takes is applying common sense. Paula Scallon, who had to share a locker room with Lia Thomas, had this to say: "I'm deeply grateful to the Department of Education for addressing Title IX violations concerning female athletes with such seriousness. As a former University of Pennsylvania swimmer who was forced to compete against and share a locker room with a male athlete, I look forward to them holding accountable the higher education institutions that promoted this." And in the UPenn lawsuit that was filed on Tuesday, Coach Mike Schnur was mentioned by name, and they alleged that Schnur misled the players about whether Thomas would be sharing a locker room with them. So, as per usual, just like with SJSU, they don't even tell these women what's going to be happening. They don't even give them a heads up. No courtesy whatsoever. SJSU didn't even tell these women that the person in question was male. They didn't even bother doing that. They're still denying that this person is transgender. And remember, Brooke Slusser was sharing accommodation, sharing hotel rooms with this individual. All the women had their suspicions, but they weren't allowed to talk about it because that's outing somebody, as if somebody can be outed for being male or female, for goodness sake. It's pretty obvious. So they weren't even allowed to talk about it or acknowledge it. The typical tactic of urging people not to live in reality and even punishing them for acknowledging the truth, for acknowledging facts. So when it comes to the Massachusetts Interscholastic Athletics Association, which is also a part of the lawsuit that was filed on Tuesday, so they have been brought into this lawsuit because of what happened with that male basketball player, where 3 female athletes ended up getting injured. Not only that, this person was suspended permanently from another team prior to joining the KIPP Academy. And you know why this person was suspended from a previous team? He was suspended because he was looking at a girl's breasts, making her feel very uncomfortable in the locker room. Also made some inappropriate comments. And these are high school kids who were subjected to this. So this basketball player gets suspended, but then goes on to join another basketball team. And again is allowed in a locker room with girls. This is absolutely unforgivable. Prior to the Trump administration, this was considered okay. It was considered okay to subject girls to this. But the fact is, this was reckless, this was abusive, and this was outright criminal. That these organizations would go along with this. These government-funded organizations, these schools, would subject girls and women to this sort of trauma. So now all 3 of these institutions are being investigated by Trump's DOE. Last week, K-12 schools and higher education institutions were notified by the Department of Education that there would be a return to enforcing Title IX protections on the basis of biological sex, not gender identity, which is not rooted in reality, and which was introduced by the Biden administration. So absolutely wonderful news. I just cannot believe that they have subjected these young girls to this at school, at college, places where you send your children and expect these organizations to do everything within their authority, within their power to keep them safe. Instead, they're putting them in harm's way on the court or on the field, and they're putting them in harm's way in the locker room. Not only that, they're having opportunities stolen from them. Opportunities that they can't get back. It's really sad. I remember these young girls in Connecticut, what they had to go through. Even girls in a sorority were forced to share a sorority house with a male student. So reassuring to hear that the Department of Education under Trump is on this. What a contrast, what a turnaround from the last 4 years. Contrary to what you've been told, this administration is the administration that is looking out for women, that is looking out for girls, that is bringing back equal rights for everybody on the basis of sex. So this is wonderful news as far as I'm concerned. So let me know what you think. And thanks for watching. Like, comment and subscribe. Take care of yourselves, and God willing, I will see you in the next video.